Her hand was shaking so hard she almost dropped the pill bottle right there on the sidewalk. Not from the cold, from the shame of it. 73 years old. On her knees in the parking lot of a strip mall in Decatur, Georgia, trying to pick up the bottles that had scattered when her grocery bag gave out. And not one person in that parking lot slowed down. Not the man in the Patagonia vest who stepped around her. Not the woman talking on her phone who glanced down and kept walking. Not the teenager who saw the whole thing from 10 feet away and pulled out his AirPods like watching. Marveline Oates had lived long enough to know she had become invisible. She was used to it. Mostly. 61 years old when her husband Earl passed. 64 when the last of her savings went to the hospital bills he'd left behind. 67 when her landlord raised the rent on the apartment she'd lived in for 19 years, and she had to move to a smaller place, 2 bus transfers away from everything she knew. Now 73, bad hip white hair she kept pinned back neat because Earl always said a woman's pride lives is how she carries herself, and she wasn't ready to give him up in that way too. She gathered the bottles herself. Green beans, tomato paste, a small bag of rice, 1 chicken breast, the cheapest package they had. She put them in her arms like a child and stood up slow, the way you do when your hip talks back at you in cold weather. The bus stop was 2 blocks east. She started walking, what nobody in that parking lot knew, what they couldn't have known, looking at her worn coat and her plastic grocery bags and her careful, deliberate steps, was that inside her left coat pocket, tucked beneath an old receipt and a folded Kleenex, was a business card with a name on it that half the city of Atlanta would have recognized. Her daughter's name. The name didn't mean anything to Marveline anymore. Not in the way it used to. But we'll get to that. 2 blocks away, inside Delgado's Tire and Auto on Flat Shoals Avenue, a man named Cornelius Webb was lying on his back under a 2009 Chevy Tahoe that wasn't his, doing a brake job for a customer who'd already called twice to ask when it'd be ready. 58 years old, big hands. Quiet man. The kind of quiet that comes not from having nothing to say, but from having learned that most people aren't really listening. He owned Delgado's. Had for 11 years. Not because anyone handed it to him. The original owner, a man named Hector Delgado, who'd taken a chance on Cornelius 20 years ago when nobody else would, had sold it to him for next to nothing and forgiven the remainder of the loan when he retired to Florida. Pay it forward, see, Hector had told him. That's the only currency that matters. Cornelius paid it forward the way he knew how. He hired men coming out of the county jail when nobody else would give them a shot. He let customers pay on a plan when they couldn't cover the bill up front. He kept his prices lower than every shop in a 5-mile radius because he lived in this neighborhood, and he knew what people were actually working with. He wasn't broke, but he wasn't far from it. The reason? His daughter Amara's first semester tuition was due in 19 days. Not college tuition. Trade school. She was 22 and she'd chosen well. HVAC certification program over in Marietta. 14 months, guaranteed job placement, starting salary around $48,000. Smart choice, practical. His choice if he'd had the chance to make it at 22. The cost, $4,200. Due in full before the semester locked in. He had $2,800 saved. He needed $1,400 more. He had 19 days. That morning, he'd turned down a fishing trip with his oldest friend Raymond, because $60 in gas and food was $60 toward the remaining gap. He'd eaten a peanut butter sandwich at his desk for lunch. He'd told Amara everything was fine. She believed him. She was 22. He wanted her to stay 22 a little longer. He came out from under the Tahoe at 4:15 in the afternoon, wiped his hands, told the customer it'd be ready by 6. Went back to the office, opened the drawer where he kept the tuition folder, looked at the number one more time, closed it. He didn't wallow. That wasn't his style. He went to the supply shop 3 blocks over for brake fluid, same as he did twice a week. And that's when he saw her. She'd made it 1 block before the hip gave out. Not collapsed. Marveline wasn't the collapsing type. But she'd stopped at the corner of Flat Shoals and Glenwood, one hand on the street sign pole, grocery bags in the crook of her other arm, and her face had gone the color of old paper. Cornelius was crossing the street when he noticed. Not her first. The bags. They were slipping. She was trying to hold the pole and the groceries at the same time, and losing the negotiation with both. He didn't think about it. Some things, you either think about or you do. He crossed to her side. "Ma'am, let me help you with those." She looked at him the way a woman who's been through enough looks at a stranger offering help. Measuring. Deciding. "I'm fine," she said. "Yes, ma'am, I can see that. I'm going to take these bags, though." He said it gently, like it wasn't a question. She let him. He took the bags, 2 of them. Not heavy, just awkward. He stood next to her without rushing her. "How far?" "Bus stops on the next block. I can make it from there. Where you headed?" "Panthersville Road." He knew it. 20-minute bus ride. Then what? Another walk. He looked at her hip, at the way her weight was shifting. He did the math a person does in a second, the math that has nothing to do with numbers. "I've got a truck. I can take you. I don't need charity." "It's not charity. It's a Tuesday afternoon and I'm going to the supply shop on Boulder Crest anyway. That's half the way." She looked at him again. "You're a mechanic? Own the shop on Flat Shoals, Delgado's." Something shifted in her face. Not warmth exactly. Recognition. Hector Delgado's place? Was his. Mine now. She nodded slowly. "Hector fixed my Earl's car for 15 years. Never charged him a dime more than it cost." She looked at Cornelius like she was adding something up. "All right." He drove her all the way to Panthersville Road. She didn't ask him to. He just did. On the way, she talked a little. Her name was Marveline. Retired school cafeteria worker, 27 years with DeKalb County. Husband gone 12 years now. One daughter she didn't see much. She said that last part the way people say things they're tired of explaining. He didn't push. He carried her bags to her door. 3rd floor, no elevator. He didn't mention it. Just walked up. At the door she turned around. "What's your name?" "Cornelius." "That's an old name. My grandmother's choice." She almost smiled. "Well, Cornelius, you didn't have to do any of this." "No, ma'am." "Then why did you?" He thought about it honestly. "My mother used to say that how you treat people when there's nothing in it for you, that's who you actually are." He shrugged. "I believe that." Marveline Oates looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her coat pocket, past the receipt and the Kleenex, and pulled out the business card. She held it for a second, then put it back. "Thank you, Cornelius." She went inside. He walked back down 3 flights of stairs, drove to the supply shop, bought the brake fluid, went back to finish the Tahoe. He forgot about it by morning. He didn't know that Marveline hadn't. 3 days passed. Cornelius opened the shop at 7, closed it at 6. Ate dinner standing over his kitchen sink, fell asleep on the couch with a history book on his chest. Amara called on Wednesday night. He asked about her classes. She said everything was good. He said the tuition would be handled. She said, "Okay, Dad." She trusted him. The folder in the drawer said $2,800. He needed $4,200. He had 16 days. On Thursday morning, a man came into the shop. He wasn't the kind of man who usually came into Delgado's. The shoes were the first thing, the kind of dress shoes that cost more than a brake job. Dark suit, young, maybe 35, carrying a leather portfolio. "I'm looking for Cornelius Webb." Cornelius came out from the bay. "That's me." The man extended his hand. "My name is David Park. I work for Constance Oates." Cornelius wiped his hand on a rag, shook. The name didn't register. "What can I do for you?" "Mrs. Oates would like to meet with you. She's asked me to arrange it at your convenience, today if possible. She said to tell you her mother sends her regards." Cornelius stared at him. "Her mother?" "Marveline Oates. You gave her a ride home from Glenwood Avenue on Tuesday." He remembered. Of course he remembered. The bags, the hip, the 3 flights of stairs. "Is she all right?" "She's perfectly well, Mr. Webb." David Park allowed a small expression that wasn't quite a smile. "She's been telling people about you. She doesn't need to do that." "No, sir, but she did." He almost didn't go. Not because he was suspicious. He was a practical man. And suspicious was a luxury that cost time. It was more that the shop was busy, and he had a transmission on his lift, and the Tahoe customer was already satisfied, and things were moving forward. And he didn't want anything to interrupt the 19 days momentum he'd built around himself. But he went at noon, because David Park said it wouldn't take long, and because something in the man's manner suggested it was worth the hour. He drove himself, parked in a garage downtown that cost $8, took an elevator to the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street with a seal on the glass door that read Oates Development Group. He'd heard of it. Everyone in Atlanta had heard of it. He stood in the lobby looking at the seal for a full 5 seconds before David Park appeared and led him down a hallway lined with photographs, groundbreakings, ribbon cuttings, a magazine cover, a woman in her late 60s, sharp eyes, natural silver hair pulled back, arms crossed, standing in front of a half-built apartment complex. The headline, Building Atlanta from the Inside Out. Constance Oates, 20 years of community-first development. His feet slowed. Oates. Marveline Oates. Same name, same face in the photographs, 40 years younger, same bearing. He kept walking. The office at the end of the hall was smaller than he expected. No power furniture, no mahogany, a desk, 2 chairs, a wide window looking out over the city. A woman stood at the window with her back to him, looking out. She turned around, mid-60s. Slight, but the posture of someone who'd never let a room intimidate her. Eyes exactly like the woman on the 3rd floor in Panthersville Road. Same measuring quality. Same sense that she was deciding something before she spoke. Mr. Webb. She extended her hand. Her grip was firm. Thank you for coming. Please, sit down. He sat. She sat across from him, folded her hands. My mother called me Thursday morning. She doesn't call much. She said it plainly, without apology. She told me a man named Cornelius Webb had carried her groceries, driven her home, and walked up 3 flights of stairs when he didn't have to. She said his shop was on Flat Shoals. She didn't have to call you about that. No. She didn't. Constance Oates leaned back slightly. I want to be honest with you about something, Mr. Webb. My mother and I have a complicated history. I built a career in community development and managed not to be particularly present in her community. Her community being her life, her apartment, her neighborhood, her. She paused. She's proud. She would never ask me for anything. And because she would never ask, I told myself she didn't need. Cornelius said nothing. What she described, the parking lot, the people who walked around her. What she said was the look on your face when you saw her struggling. She hasn't called me to tell me about a person in 9 years. Constance looked at him steadily. I need to understand who you are. He told her the truth. He was a mechanic. He owned a shop he'd bought from a man who'd believed in him when no one else did. He hired people other businesses turned away. He did the work because the neighborhood needed it done, and someone had to do it. She asked about his family. He mentioned Amara, the HVAC program. He didn't mention the tuition gap. That wasn't why he was here. Constance was quiet for a moment. How much is short? He looked up. The tuition. How short are you? He hadn't said it. Mr. Webb, I built a career reading rooms. You mentioned your daughter and then you very deliberately stopped talking. Her eyes didn't move. How much? He told her. She nodded once. Turned to her desk. Wrote something. Turned back. Oates Development Group sponsors 22 workforce training programs in the metro area. We have never sponsored a vocational program in the Decatur corridor. Not because we didn't know one was needed. She set down her pen. Because I didn't know who to trust to run it. Cornelius waited. I've been looking at Flat Shoals Avenue for 2 years. It's the right location. The infrastructure is there. The community need is documented. We have 3 reports that say it. She looked at him. What I did not have was a person who belongs to that street. Who the street belongs to back. He was very still. I'd like to propose a partnership. Oates Development Group funds a workforce training center on Flat Shoals Avenue. Trade skills, auto mechanics, HVAC, electrical basics, basic plumbing. You help us design the curriculum. You consult on the hiring of instructors. In exchange, we bring Delgados under a community enterprise umbrella, liability covered. Operating budget. Supplemented. Your staff expanded. He stared at her. The tuition, he finally said. Amara's tuition. Covered. Today. That's not a condition of the partnership. That's separate. She said it like it was obvious. You walked up 3 flights of stairs for my mother, because it was the right thing to do. The least I can do is make sure your daughter can start her program on time. Cornelius Webb sat in that chair on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street and did not say anything for what felt like a very long time. He thought about Hector Delgado, about the loan forgiven over a handshake, about pay it forward, see. He thought about Marveline, the pole, the bags, the way she'd said my Earl's car for 15 years. He thought about Amara calling Wednesday night and trusting him. I have one question, he said. Go ahead. The people who come through this program, real certifications? Not just a certificate they print in-house? Constance Oates almost smiled. License through the Georgia Board of Construction Industry, job placement agreements with 3 Oates development contractors. Starting wages, not minimum wage. He nodded. Then yes. They shook hands. He drove back to Flat Shoals Avenue and went back under the transmission. He didn't say a word to anyone. That evening he sat in his truck in the parking lot outside the shop after everyone else had left. He opened his phone, called Amara. Hey, Dad, the tuition's covered. Silence. Dad, all of it. You're in. Don't worry about any of the details right now. Just show up on your first day. A longer silence. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Younger sounding somehow. What happened? I helped somebody carry her groceries. What? I'll explain later. Get some sleep. He hung up, sat in the truck another few minutes looking at the streetlight on Flat Shoals Avenue. The same light he'd parked under for 11 years, the same block. He didn't feel lucky. He felt like something had been confirmed. The next morning, Cornelius drove to Panthersville Road. 3rd floor. He knocked. Marveline opened the door in her housecoat, hair pinned back, a cup of something hot in her hand. She looked at him. You didn't have to come here, she said. No, ma'am. Did she offer you something? She did. Marveline studied him. Did you take it? I did. It's for the neighborhood, not me. I want you to know that. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped back from the door, which was the closest she was going to get to an invitation. He went in, sat in the chair she pointed to, Earl's chair, he could tell, the worn arm on one side from decades of the same hand resting there. She sat across from him with her cup. She called me, Marveline said. Constance? She called me the same night you met with her. First time she'd called in the evening in I don't know how long. She looked down at her cup. She asked me how I was doing, actually asked. A beat. I think she was embarrassed. She doesn't seem like a woman who embarrasses easy. She isn't. That's how I know she meant it. Cornelius didn't push. Marveline looked out the window, the same window she'd sat at for however many years in this apartment, watching the parking lot below, where the buses turned around. I didn't call her because I wanted something from her, she said, finally. I called her because you reminded me of something. She turned back to look at him. What you said, about how you treat people when there's nothing in it for you. She shook her head slightly. Earl used to say the same thing, almost word for word. I hadn't heard it in 12 years. Cornelius didn't say anything. She's not a bad person, Marveline said. She's just busy in the way people get busy when they're building things. You forget to tend what's already built. She paused. We're working on it. I'm glad. She nodded once. Final, the way she did most things. Your daughter, she said. What's her name? Amara, that's a good name. She looked at him. You make sure she calls you Cornelius. Don't let her get busy. He drove back to the shop. On Flat Shoals Avenue, across from Delgado's, there was a vacant storefront that had been shuttered for 4 years. Paper in the windows, faded orange paint, a handwritten sign from 2019 that just said Space for Lee's with a number nobody ever called. He looked at it, the way he'd been looking at it for 11 years. He went inside and got back to work. 6 months later, the paper came out of the window. It took a demolition crew 2 weeks, and a construction team 12 weeks, and more material than Cornelius had ever seen run down one block of a neighborhood street. He was there every day, not managing from a distance. There, in the space, learning the drawings, asking the engineers questions, remembering what Hector had taught him about not pretending you know more than you do when something's being built that people are going to rely on. On the wall going up over the entrance, the name went up in clean steel letters: Webb Community Trade Center, an Oats Development Initiative. Darnell's, the barber shop 2 doors down that had been there since 1987, put a sign in the window the week of the opening: "We're still here. And now we've got neighbors." Amara came home for the opening. She was 3 months into her HVAC program, and she'd passed her first certification exam on the first try. She stood next to Cornelius outside the center with a cup of coffee she'd gotten from the new cafe that had opened across the street. Another Oats initiative, Cornelius had learned. A small business incubator wrapped into the same block grant. "Dad," she said, looking at the letters on the building, "did you know this was going to happen?" "No. Were you trying to make it happen?" "I was trying to get home before my brake fluid order closed." She laughed, the kind of laugh that sounds like relief. He put his arm around her. Inside, through the glass, you could see the first cohort setting up. 31 students, aged 19 to 64. The oldest was a man named Franklin, who had worked freight for 38 years, and been laid off when the depot automated. He had come in on the first day of registration in a button-down shirt with a crease in it, like he was going to a job interview. He just didn't know it yet. On the wall of the main hall, 2 things in frames. The first was a photograph, Marveline Oates at the ribbon cutting, standing next to Constance, both of them looking at the camera. They were not holding hands, but their shoulders were touching. Below the photograph, a small brass plate. 1 line: "It only takes 1 person to stop." The second was a hand-drawn map. Amara had made it the night before the opening, sitting at Cornelius's kitchen table with a marker and a piece of cardstock. She'd drawn Flat Shoals Avenue, the shop, the center, the barber, the cafe, the bus stop, the whole block. Arrow pointing to one corner. A small star. Next to the star, in her handwriting, "Here is where it started." He didn't need a plaque for the second one. He just needed it on the wall. A year later, a Tuesday afternoon, Cornelius was locking up the shop after a long day, the kind where everything that can run late does. He was walking to his truck when he saw a woman sitting on the low concrete wall near the bus shelter. 50s. Heavyset. A single bag beside her. The look of someone who'd been somewhere difficult and wasn't sure where they were going next. He slowed. The bus had stopped running on this route at 6. It was 6:20. He walked over. "You all right?" She looked up, guarded. "I'm fine." He nodded. He recognized the answer for what it was. "Where are you trying to get to?" she told him. 20-some minutes east. He had leftovers on his stove at home. Amara was calling at 8. He had a book he'd been meaning to finish for 3 weeks. "I've got a truck," he said. "I'm heading that way." She looked at him the way people look when they're not sure yet. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. "Come on." He drove her. On the way she told him a little. Single mother. Just got out of a hard stretch. No plan yet, but a cousin who said there might be something. At a red light he reached into the center console and found a card. His own this time. Not the shop card. The center's. Webb Community Trade Center. Cornelius Webb, director. He handed it to her. "Monday morning, 9 o'clock. Whatever you want to learn to do, we'll figure out how to get you there." She looked at the card for a long time. Why are you doing this? He thought about a parking lot in Decatur. About bags of groceries and a woman holding a street sign. About a man named Hector who forgave a loan over a handshake and said pay it forward. About Amara, passing her certification on the first try. About Marveline and Constance standing with their shoulders touching. Because somebody did it for me, he said. And somebody did it for her. And now I get to do it for you. She didn't say anything else. He drove her all the way to her cousin's door. The night was quiet, and the streets were clean from the rain that had come through late afternoon. and everything that had been there before was still there, just washed a little newer, a little more itself. I've been sitting with Cornelius's story for a while now, and the thing I keep coming back to isn't the center, or the partnership, or the numbers. It's a man crossing a street because a woman's grocery bag was slipping. It's the 11 seconds it takes to decide. It's 30 people in a parking lot who did their own math and kept walking. And one who did a different kind of math entirely. We talk about giving like it requires something you don't have yet. More money, more time, more certainty that it will matter. But that's not what Cornelius had when he crossed that street. He had a brake fluid order and a transmission on his lift, and 16 days to close a gap he wasn't sure he could close. He crossed the street anyway. That's not a reward story. That's a character story. The reward just showed up because of who he already was. I think about how many Marvelines there are. Women and men who've carried too much for too long and learned to say I'm fine because nobody was listening anyway. I think about what it costs them every time they say that to the person who doesn't slow down. And I think about what it cost Cornelius to slow down. $8 for parking. An hour of his afternoon. 3 flights of stairs on a Thursday. That's it. That's the whole ledger. Sometimes I wonder if we overestimate what it takes and underestimate what it does. So I'll ask you honestly, the last time someone needed you to slow down, did you? Drop that in the comments. Like this video if Cornelius's story landed with you. Subscribe to The Bold I Am, because these are the stories I believe in telling. Share this with someone who needs to remember that who you are when there's nothing in it for you is the only version of yourself that actually counts. I'll see you in the next one.